All right, in order to really go over this discussion, my model that I'm creating here, I need to discuss my history a little bit, especially in regards to the typology shenanigans. A little over 2 years ago, a friend of mine introduced me to the concept of cognitive function theory as being more than just a horoscope, which is what I had come to the conclusion to when I was a teenager, and had initially been introduced to the system overall. The entire premise of MBTI, as I understood it when I was 15, so 15 years ago almost, was that cognitive functions and MBTI, your personality type, necessarily dictated that you had certain different types of intentional manners and ways of thought, and didn't have the other ones. So if you were an FI user, you were just not an FE user. If you were a T user, you were just not an F user. You were your four letters, which I think is incredibly ridiculous, and the general sentiment amongst the typology community is that is in fact correct. In fact, MBTI itself has taken in the notion of shadow functions and effectively says that, yeah, you do use all of the types. So with that in mind, I was introduced back to cognitive function theory and typology through socionics. Socionics is the European version of MBTI. Effectively, it's far more popular in Europe, especially in Central and Eastern Europe than it is here. I believe it's also far more popular in those areas than MBTI is. And socionics has its own problems. Socionics Model A and MBTI and all the derivations of MBTI all are fairly limited in scope, and I don't think they quite fully grasp the concepts that are actually at play here. And that's what I have been trying to do. So I was introduced to this, like I said, a little over 2 years ago, and in January of this last year, I started the process of putting together my thoughts. It took me a little over a year and a half to really nail down what I thought of the definitions and how they worked and all the impacts and how all this relates back to other areas of psychology and academic thought processes and so on and so forth. And that's where my background is. I'm currently studying at University of Portland. I'm double majoring in physics and philosophy. I've been studying these subjects on my own since I was 18 until about 25 when I started going back to school again. I've now, through the trials and tribulations of moving and being fairly poor, I've gone through the associate's program, and I'm now at the university level continuing my studies in these areas. And part of that process is I want to make sure that any system that I work on, such as this cognitive function theory system, has to also work with other fields of thought, or else it's just, I don't think it's going to be correct. I'm not using other fields of thought to say necessarily that my system is correct, but my system is also logically consistent and fits in with other fields of academic study, such as philosophy and psychology itself as a whole. And using mainstream psychology as well as other fields of academic research as the basis of understanding, I'm going to try to explain what I mean when I am talking about cognitive function theory in general and what the basic premise is. And on this page here, I have pulled up some basic ideas that I have when it comes to socionics and Myers-Briggs and cognitive function theory in general. And I use this word taxonomy here, and a taxonomy is different from a classification system, and it's a specific type of classification system where you're trying to break down things in a logical manner. There's all possibilities are considered in taxonomy. That's kind of the whole point. In fact, we'll talk about the taxonomy of cognition in general, which is exactly what this is. As you can see here, cognition is the overlying thing that the judging and perceiving functions come from. The ability to analyze information and actually have thoughts that are not just instinctual and primal in nature. That's what cognition is. In fact, it's a derivation of the theory of mind, which is a very common conversation topic in psychology and in other fields. The notion that us as humans and possibly some other beings, but mainly us as humans, come to the realization that we hold knowledge that other people don't have, and we have thought processes that we're different. We actually are able to think about ourselves. That's where moral agency comes from, as some people would put it, and where agency in general comes from is this notion of cognition and theory of mind. This is a dichotomy set forth by Jung himself, and there are many reasons for this dichotomy, which I will go into a later video explaining. I actually will and do want to have other people help me come up with a logical explanation of this. I think that would be a good project to work with others on. But in general, this is noted as two separate entities. Your perceiving function and your judging functions are two separate entities. This is how you receive data from the outside world. This is how you process and the criteria and so on and so forth that you judge that data on. And I have that breaking down here a little bit. But underneath here, you have the difference between these types being sensing and intuition, feeling and thinking. And really what this is that, I'm going back up here, we all cognate. We all have the ability to think, and we actively do so. We use all of the functions to think, and we have preferences that we develop naturally as a child. You develop a preference for these functions as your primary mode of interacting with the world. And then from there, breaking down, you develop preferences for each of these functions as well. And this is the reason why you have 4 functions that you value and 4 functions that you don't value. Is the 4 functions that are in your front stack, i.e. your valued stack, are the ones that you develop a preference for. You will use those whenever possible over the other ones, and then you'll use the functions you don't value when the situation necessitates it. And so someone that's an intuitive, they will value using intuition over sensing, and at the same time they will value using the different types of intuition. They will value using one of those over the other one, but they'll always value using intuition itself over sensing. And therefore, what happens is that their preferential use of something like intuition leads to strength in that function. The usage leads to them being more adept, more competent at actually being able to use the process. Someone that does not prefer to use sensing will be inherently weaker than someone that values sensing. So someone that's an intuitive type, their valued intuition type will be always more powerful than these, and that's not up for debate. But their non-valued intuitive function will also be stronger than all of their sensing functions, regardless of whether or not they value one of the sensing functions, which they inherently will. The same thing happens with the F functions, the T functions. Here I have labeled F as interest in people, feeling is an interest in people, and thinking is an interest in things. And this goes back to mainstream psychology, and mainstream psychology uses what's called the Big Five, and Big Five is their replacement for cognitive function theory, because they found that cognitive function theory doesn't have correlates with the statistical data that they have found, and they found 5 areas that do have statistical correlates that are strong enough to actually rely on. And one of those is people that have an interest in people and an interest in things. And so this links to mainstream psychology. Feeling is an interest in people and thinking is an interest in things. I don't think that's a stretch to say that's actually true. Say someone is a T-type, like myself, I have a preference to talk about things in structures of things instead of people and social dynamics. That's my preference. But I will still have to interface with people and still have to interface or think about social dynamics. And when I do, I will do it in context of a specific F-type. And when I'm doing my thinking, I'll do it in context of a specific T-type. But my T-type will always, even if I don't prefer the other T-type, will always be stronger than my F-types, F functions, because I have a preference for thinking overall, and I will use both of those just innately more than I will use my F functions. Going down here, we have all 8 of the functions laid out here now, as we understand them currently. And what I'm trying to say here is that the way you build cognition is a byproduct of nature and nurture. The natural process is some people will it's seemingly born to be a certain way. The way they are before they realize that they are an individual being that has individual thought processes, it already leans towards some way, but their type isn't going to be set in stone, nor is there are there full function usage and function strength. And this is where the nurture comes into. So someone already has a preponderance to be a certain way, certain couple of types. Let's say that breakdown is here at this level. They're innately going to be one of these two things, or they may be innately one of these four things as like in their front stack. How they end up in the long run with what functions they value on this level, I don't know if that's determinant. In fact, I don't know if any of these are determinant. That's not something I'm willing to postulate, but that's the idea, is that there is some amount of nature, but nurture itself, the way you grow up and how you interact with the world, will shape your type, because you'll run into situations where it's okay. Say SE is more useful for you in certain situations. You'll start to use SE and you go, hey, this worked out well for me, so I'm going to continue using SE. And it's like, why would I use these things? I'll use these things. And then SE works better for you than SI. Therefore, all of a sudden you go, yeah, SE is just better. You develop a preference for it, and then you strengthen and so on and so forth. And then you do the same thing over here. You're like, okay, well, we live in a social world. We live amongst people and civilizations. Therefore, I feel it's natural for me to be inclined to be an F type. Why would I prefer things over people? So you just develop like your F functions, and your F functions are going to be stronger than your T functions, just because at this level up here, you value this more than you do this. Going down to this level is, since I'm naturally, we'll use myself as an example. I'm naturally a T user. I developed an interest in things far more than an interest in people, and I've worked at developing these processes. The last couple of years, I've worked at developing these processes quite a bit too, so I'm not as bad as I used to be, but especially when I was younger, and this is a common thing for NT types or T types in general when they're younger, is they neglect their F functions and they focus on their T functions. And the difference between these two is, something like one leads to the other, and you come to the conclusion that the one that leads to the other is the better choice. And I'll use the T's as an example for this. If I were to define these two, which I think is necessary for the context of the conversation, I would say the TE is a focus on organization and efficiency. Naturally, it's a natural way of finding what's the most organized method, what's the most efficient method, and from that you derive what's the logical method in some sense, and you derive how you should do things in a quick and in the best manner. And it's the reason why instructions and things like that are considered to be TE things, because it's like, what's the best way to get from point A to point B? Well, if you're flying, it's a direct line between the two. It's you do this step, this step, this step, and this step, and these are the fewest things you have to do in order to get to that position. TI is a focus on conditional logic, or Boolean logic, if you will. TI is a focus on if this, then that, or functions, and so on and so forth, where you end up parsing data on like this conditional logic, and from that you derive what you should be doing, and some of those will innately be a TE function. And so for this, I have pulled up this thing here. This is conditional logic that's used. This would be an example of TI in my opinion. And so if I'm trying to explain to you the notion that if I have a parakeet, then I have a bird, because a parakeet is a type of bird, right? Goes back to that classification, so on and so forth. If I don't have a bird, then I don't have a parakeet. And if I define, let's assume we define parakeet as a living mammal that has all the functions and descriptions of a parakeet. Say I don't have a bird, then I don't have a parakeet. That is a logical statement that you can and will derive. And from that, you can explain things. But there are more efficient ways of explaining things, such as modus ponens. So, modus ponens is the process of you have a conditional statement and then use the antecedent of that conditional statement in order to invalidate the statement. So, if P, then Q. If I have a bird, then I have a canary. If not P, then not Q. If I don't have if not Q, then not P, excuse me. If I don't have a bird, then I don't have a canary. So this is a more efficient way of stating that entire process, and a TE user will say, okay, well, this is the way that I would use this, and they would come to that conclusion by trying to simplify the process as much as possible and get it to be as efficient as possible. A TI user will adopt this for sure, and they should. It's the simplest way of explaining a concept. If P, then Q. If not Q, then not P. But they won't necessarily always do that, and they'll sometimes use the bird and canary reference or analogy in order to explain the concept. And I do things like this all the time. So this lack of efficiency, this usage of TI for the sake of TI, but not leaning towards the efficiency thing, is an example of someone that doesn't value. I don't value the efficiency. The efficiency is just a byproduct of my innate functions. So if we go back to here, I don't value this function. I use this function, and more often than not, I'll end up here anyways. I'll end up having efficiency and organization to some extent. But I don't put it at forefront. It's just a byproduct. I'm going to be good at both of these, comparatively at least. I'm going to be good at both of these, be better than I am at these two functions. And if one of these is my main function, then I'm going to be better at this function than these functions, because I use this function more. I have a preference for it, and that preference has built usage, which has built strength. And that's the reason why most of these functions are your strongest functions, and that's the reason why some of your shadow functions can and will be very strong. In fact, your demonstrative function is going to be the inverse of your tool function. And so for me, I think that I'm an INTP. My main function is TI, my tool function is NE, my demonstrative function would be NI. So in the process of me going through and explaining things, I'm going to demonstrate NI all the time, because I'm going to be using it. I'm going to be using it constantly. I'm going to use it more than I'm going to use TE, because I naturally get TE just from TI all the time. In fact, it's so natural for me to use TI that I don't lean into TE function nearly as much as I would lean into NI function, because I'm using NE as a tool. And NE as a tool is a derivation of intuition as a tool, and so on and so forth. Your cognitive functions, typology in general, is a byproduct of cognition. From that, you have two distinct modes of cognition: perceiving information and judging information. And from that, you develop a preference in these modes. Your preference will be into sensing intuition, feeling or thinking, because these are two different types of thought processes. That's why that breaks down that way. You're going to value one of each of them. You're going to use them in their specific role, and that's what becomes your main function and your tool function, or your creative function, is which one you use first and which one you use second, which one is your main way of interfacing, and so on and so forth. From that, you develop strength in both the intuition, sensing, or feeling, thinking. You develop strength in both of the types. So say I'm an intuitive type, my NI and NE are both going to be strong. I'm a thinking type, my TI and TE are both going to be strong. And you disregard, to some extent, the other ones, and they're going to be weak. Going down here, you'll innately come across, okay, should I use NI or NE in this situation? And you'll develop a preference for one or the other. And then that preference will lead to usage more, and you'll just naturally lean on it. Okay, so this video has gone on long enough. This is the first of two typology videos that I'm going to be creating. The other one is going to come out a little later today. I don't know what I'll be discussing yet, but I'm going to try and make 4 videos a day, 2 of which being related to typology. And in the process of doing that, I'm going to lay out a lot of things. This system here, these will be probably separate videos. They may not be. I don't know yet, but they'll probably be a whole separate video series than the 2 videos a day that I have where I discuss typology in general. I'm hoping that those 2 videos a day will be pulled from things that people ask me. So with that in mind, if you like this content, please give it a like and subscribe. And post down below what you are interested in having me go over, because I will go over pretty much anything that you want, as long as it's reasonable and doesn't violate TOI. specifically in relation to the typology shenanigans. Let me know what you want to hear about and get my perspective on, my analysis on, and we'll go from there. Thank you for tuning in. Have a good day.